Okay, I'm gonna go over the food that I took and that I ate for Mammoth Sniper Challenge. Again, quick overview. It was a 3-day event in the field where you took all your gear with you. The only thing you didn't have to take was water. They provided that. And every day you covered about 10 miles of hiking or more of rucking with your pack. And then throughout the day, you shot multiple courses of fire. The rucking had a time constraint. 16-minute miles was the limit. If you were slower than that, you wouldn't finish the event. Over the course of the 3 days, we covered, I think, 35 or 37 miles was the final count. Going into this, I knew I was going to eat um, probably different than 99.9% of the competitors there or most of the conventional recommendations. I was going to go super low carb. You could even maybe call it keto. The first time we did this 2 years ago, I prepared for that. That was my plan. We ended up doing a few hours of the match and then got disqualified. Took the year off and then came back 2022, January 2022, this year, a few weeks ago, and tackled it again. And I went in with the same plan of going super low carb on my fueling. Let me give you a little history in regards to myself. I had, since I've been working for CrossFit, don't work for them anymore. Since I've been doing CrossFit since 05, 06, I was pretty much a proponent of following the prescription that Greg said was best for CrossFitters at the time, which was the zone. It did the zone off and on for many years. And through that, that's a lower carb than the traditional American diet, lower carb prescription. Through that, then started experimenting with even less carbs. Within the last 4 or 5 years, Greg became a really big proponent and fan of keto diet and a super low carb diet. So I started experimenting with that off and on. So basically, why I say that is because for the last 15 years, regardless of how I eat, sometimes I am pretty much mostly always on a lower carb diet. So I'm used to performing and eating or and working out or doing things on a lower carb diet. Within the last couple of years, there were phases that I went through where I completely cut carbs out, and you could say I was on a more traditional keto diet. Although the keto diet, as written, says you can have up to 50 grams of carbs per day once you get to a point where you're fat adapted. There were points where I was having like 10 or 15 grams of carbs a day. So in 2021, leading up to the games, there was an 8 week, 6 to 8 week, 2 months period where cut carbs completely out. Then after that, I kind of dived back and forth, really low carbs, reintroduced carbs. Um, Through the holidays, I had consumed a lot of carbs. And leading into the match, which was the first weekend of January, I hadn't done a really good job of cutting carbs completely out, but I knew I could still perform in the match with very little carbs because I'm used to going back and forth. So I was committed to going super low carb at the match. In regards to low carb and endurance events and stuff like this, there is a lot of research and a lot of anecdotal evidence uh, in essence, that supports low carb and being fat adapted, high fat diets work well for endurance events. So do some research, look into that. I'm not going to go too much into that because I'm not the expert. There's plenty of guys out there who talk about that. Look up Thomas DeLure and other low fat, or I'm sorry, not low fat, low carb keto experts for information on this topic. But it's not, I'm not trying anything radical. I'm trying something uncommon. I'm doing something uncommon, but also something that I am used to doing, and I know I can perform well when I eat super low carb. And again, there's a lot of data out there, evidence, and people who do eat super low carb, high fat to perform specifically in the endurance world. In the endurance world, it's caught on a lot of steam. And in essence, what it is you're fueling with fat rather than with carbohydrates. And so that's the route I went. Now I'm going to dive into the bag that had my food and show you what was left over and then talk about what I took. So here's the stove and the titanium pot for heating our water. I'll go into that in a minute. The titanium spoon, super lightweight. I actually almost thought about cutting it off, but I mean it's ounces, but that's the degree to which I was shaving ounces, but so I left it. And so here's what was left: one meal and one bison stick. And actually, the one meal being left in the pouch was, I thought about not taking this extra meal, but was supportive of the notion that I took too many meals. Now, so what did I start with? In this pouch for meals, the event started on Friday morning. So for Friday, I said, I don't need breakfast. That morning before we left our house, we VRBO'd a house. I ate a big steak, broccoli, and some butter. And then, so didn't need breakfast for Friday. That meant I had two other meals for that day. I needed a lunch and a dinner. And then so for the next day, for Saturday, I did the same thing, 3 meals. I needed a breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And then for Sunday, I only needed 2 meals because the match ends on Sunday afternoon. So I took a breakfast and a lunch, which took me to 7 meals total for the match. And then I decided at the last minute to throw in an extra meal, which at the end of the day, I shouldn't have done that. I should have stayed with my plan. Now, in between every one of those meals, I took some bison sticks. Froning had recently sent me out some of his Froning Farms bison sticks. I took some bison sticks and a bunch of cashews and almonds, little packs, basically one in between every meal. And so that was my fuel and food source. These meals, and in between each meal, I had a bison stick and like a sleeve of cashews or almonds. Now let me talk real quickly. And so this is what was left over. I ate everything but this meal and this bison stick. The meals I decided to go with. So as soon as I decided to do this a few years ago, I started researching. I googled keto camping meals, and a company came up. I was very surprised. Next Mile Meals. Next Mile Meals. And so I started buying a bunch of their meals and started eating them when I go camp at the ranch or even at home, just to taste them and get used to them. And they tasted great. And they met the requirements I was looking for of being super low carb, high protein, high fat. Obviously, the bison stick, low carb, and then the nuts, they have carbs in them, but they're mostly low carb-ish. So this meal right here, the chicken and broccoli, 51 grams of fat, a lot of fat, which is exactly what I was looking for. 11 grams of carbs and 49 grams of protein. So this is the type of meal I had. I have a couple others, so this was in the pack that I have left over that didn't go with me, but I'll give you an example of what these had in them. So this one has 28 grams of fat, not as much as this other meal, and this is deli roast beef. It has 4 grams of carbohydrate, and that's more along the lines of what I was looking for, that low of carbs, and then 54 grams of protein. This meal here, the Italian meatball, it had 39 grams of fat, 9 grams of carbs, and 42 grams of protein. What I was looking for, it's interesting because as this was going along, I realized I could have and should have taken way less of these. These were great. They taste good, but food for me at that match was not a comfort item, meaning I didn't need a warm breakfast. I didn't need a warm lunch. I actually think I could have taken more. I could have even taken cold cuts. I could have taken more like beef jerky like things, dehydrated beef, and some fat, and less of these meals, because at a certain point it didn't even make sense for me to break out the stove and heat it up. Actually, I thought since the match, long and hard, that I could have probably done the whole match without even taking a stove and a pot and a fuel source to heat a meal up, and just ate cold meals the whole time. Especially eating this way, your appetite's not as high as you would think. And and I didn't count calories ever. In all of this, I didn't. My partner, he went a different route. He had little goo packs, and he did what he needed to do to feel comfortable with his performance, and that's fine. So I didn't want to steer him in any direction. But I knew I could do this and perform well with this style of eating. So I have, like I was saying, I have thought about doing it if I did it again, possibly with no dehydrated meals and just no stove and just eating essentially all cold items. Because again, like for me, food wasn't a comfort item or food wasn't some sort of blanket. It was more of just what I needed to do to keep going. And for that reason, I don't know if I would need to do that again, but I still might, because there is something to a warm meal at night, but it wasn't the big wasn't the big recovery or mental recovery that I need from it. Some people do, but I don't feel like I do. Okay, so let me go into the stove. Titanium pot, super lightweight, MSR. I think this is the Whisper Light. Tiny little, like their lightest little camp stove they make, and then it screws onto. I should have had a canister with me, a little canister that that produces the fire, the flame. Now, before we left, I experimented with a couple different stoves. I have this one, which is probably the lightest in class, and then I have this little Primus stove that I actually used when I was in the military. And right before we left, I did a little fire with this one. Now, this stove here works the same way as that one, but it has a little igniter on it. So if it was connected to a fuel source, there's a little spark that's being created there, and it would light it. I had a lot going on that week. Forgot that I didn't bring this one, fundamentally, and had this one in my kit. As we were packing the night before, my partner goes, "Hey, do we need matches?" And I go, "No," because I thought I had the other stove. I forgot that I had this stove, even though I knew that this was a stove that I wanted to take. It was just, again, I had a lot going on. And essentially, we went to the match, and I forgot the fucking ignition source for this. So there was one point where we just ate the meals cold. We put water in them. That didn't taste great. And then eventually one night, we just bummed a light or a flame off of some other people. But I definitely made a mistake there and learned from that. So this was the stove setup. This is the pot we used. My partner also took a titanium pot, but we should have just taken one. We did take one fuel source, and that was smart. He didn't carry one. I think one of us carried it. I forgot who. And this could have probably left the lid. But basically, we set it up, heated up the water. I didn't take any coffee. I didn't take any tea. I know a lot of other people did, but again, didn't feel like I needed those comfort items. And then you poured the hot water into these meals, and you had a warm meal. So overall, eating this way for me was a success and worked. I would not recommend doing something like this unless you've experimented with it and eaten low carb for a very long time before trying it at a match like that. It was funny. One day at the end, I think it was at the end of day 1 or day 2, I heard a competitor, an older competitor, maybe slightly overweight, talking to the match director, and he said something about, he struggled at the end of the day because he fueled wrong. He fueled wrong towards the end of the day. And when he's talking about fueling wrong, he's not talking about how I've talked about when I'm talking about fueling wrong. He's talking about not enough carbs. And that's really, it's from decades and a lifetime of eating in a traditional way to where, yes, if you're crashing or if you don't feel like you're performing well, people who've eaten traditionally or conventionally, their wrong is, damn, I need more carbs. What really needs to happen is you need to create your system to be efficient at burning fats and not craving or relying on carbohydrate as your fuel source. This is a super, I'll probably get slammed in the comments. There's going to be a lot of people who this doesn't resonate with, but I'll tell you what, until you try it, until you do it, until you perform on it, this does work. It is a valid method for especially endurance events. I mean, even for CrossFit, it works great for me. I've PR'd really short time domain, high intensity CrossFit workouts eating like this. I've pulled over 400 pounds eating like this, and I've done endurance stuff eating like this. But you need to take the time to get adapted to it. You need to take the time to actually try it prior to competing with it. And so that's that. Super low carb. Mammoth Sniper Challenge, covered 35, 37 miles with started off with a 44-pound ruck, ended up at about 36 pounds over the course of 3 days. Oh, and one last thing. So at the end of the final ruck was 7 miles. We finished second. There was this one team who was really fast. They used trekking poles. I should have talked about that in another episode, but I'll talk about it maybe further down the road. We did not use trekking poles. They used trekking poles. They moved out quickly and efficiently. I'm now a fan after watching them of using trekking poles. I normally think trekking poles are better for elevation, for climbing, etc. There was not much climbing. There was little hills, whatever. That's a rant. But we finished. And at the very end, there were some teams who had Snickers. And one of the guys who finished because we were done with all the rucks. We were basically done with the competition. There was one final shooting stage. Pull the Snickers out of his bag, and he's like, "Hey, you want this?" And I'm like, "Sure." I ate it. His partner pulled the Snickers out. I ate that. And then someone bought pizza. Someone purchased pizza, and a pizza delivery guy brought like 20 pizzas. I bought a pizza, pounded 2 Snickers, 2 pizzas, and I laid down and fucking almost threw up. That was a horrible idea. So I'm not against carbs in life. I'll do that. I'll dive into it. But doing it at that moment really fucked me up. I should have known better, but I was hungry and I was over it, and so I just splurged, and it hit me hard. And it took about 20 minutes to kind of lay down and recover from that. Hope you enjoyed this video. There's one more video I'm going to do on the series of Mammoth, and that'll dive into the pack. Thanks.